Hello and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us for this very important and interesting discussion about the plight of the COVID vaccine injured. Now, this is very topical at the moment because more and more in the news, we are talking about potential issues that exist in terms of side effects that can occur longer term from COVID vaccination. This is a big topic and it's becoming more and more relevant. But there are many people who have been battling this for years, or probably not years, probably a little bit over a year. And what really does that mean? And so I have the tremendous pleasure to have with me two people from the UK who are part of an organization or supporting an organization with regards to vaccine injuries. And I'll ask you both to unmute your mics for me at the moment. And probably I'll start with a quick introduction of yourselves personally, and then we'll find out a little bit more about your organization. So, Caroline, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I live in Cirencester. I am an author, writer, a serial entrepreneur, philanthropist, and I was diagnosed with an adverse reaction to the single dose of AstraZeneca nearly 2 years ago. I'm an admin on UK CV Family, which is the largest support group in the UK for people who've had adverse reactions.
Oh, excellent, excellent. And Christian, yourself?
Yeah, thank you. My name's Christian Buckland. I'm a psychotherapist over here in the UK, and my qualifications include Doctor of Psychology in Psychotherapy and Counselling. I've been in clinical practice for over 10 years, helping to treat a wide range of issues such as anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and I've always had a clinical interest in eating disorders. And more recently, I've been heavily involved with the vaccine injured, and that has become a very important specialist interest to me. And in addition to my clinical work, I've got a keen interest in the use of behavioural science and psychological tools to gain behavioural change.
Excellent, excellent. So I guess the starting point, Caroline, is what really is this organization? What is the UK CV Family? What is it, and how did you get involved?
Charlotte Crichton founded it. I'm not the founder of it. Charlotte Crichton set it up in November 2021 after she realized that the international support groups online, they were very America focused, and we have specific needs and specific challenges in the UK that are related to the NHS and the way that our healthcare system is set up. That wasn't really being addressed in those groups. So she set up a UK group, and it's to be able to talk about the kinds of issues that are directly related to being in the UK. Some of us are on the international groups as well, but the UK CV Family is the one where we get our very British specific information. It's a really active support group. We have there's a lot of information online. Facebook is the main place that we share information, but we have Zoom socials, we have presentations from healthcare practitioners, we do outreach activities, we had picnics in the summer where we were reaching out to the public, and we have a huge amount of support for each other. It's a really active, kind, supportive, compassionate group that I'm really proud to be part of, actually.
Wow, interesting. And so what about you, Christian? What involvement do you have with this?
So I'm the psychological advisor to UK CV Family. Probably about February last year, I was asked to be involved in a documentary regarding vaccine injury from the COVID vaccine. And through a doctor called Dr Tess Laurie, she wanted to set this up. And what we wanted to really do was ensure that anyone who took part in the documentary knew exactly what they were getting involved in, what it meant to be telling their story. Because I think sometimes people, when they haven't been heard, which is something that was really major, especially last year, no one was really allowed to even mention the fact that they might be injured by the vaccine, their stories were so badly censored. Lots of people really wanted to tell their story, but telling your story can actually be quite traumatic in itself. So originally my involvement was to do some psychological screening to make sure people who took part in the documentary knew what they were getting involved in. Is it right for them to talk about it? And are they strong enough at the moment? So it was a kind of, in a way, an introduction to giving them informed consent to taking part in something that I feel they weren't really given informed consent before. So that was my original involvement, was psychological screening for potential participants for the first documentary that was made. And I spent a long time with a lot of people who were injured, and I found the stories extremely emotive. And in my day job, I deal with very difficult stories a lot because people tell me what's going on in their lives. But I actually found listening to people who are vaccine injured, I found that very difficult because of the lack of support and the lack of care, and how I felt that they were being so badly attacked. Wow. So that was my original involvement. And then I've just remained involved since.
Wonderful, tremendous. Great to see you doing that kind of support. And I want to bring a person in who I had come across on WhatsApp. I think he was sharing his personal view here. But he is part of the family, and I'll ask Caroline to probably share a little bit about what he says. But his name is John Watts, and this was what he said, and it's been all over WhatsApp and YouTube and Twitter.
A message to all the health professionals. I'm going to start calling you the health unprofessionals. If I had sat here and it just accepted what you told me, I would never have got an answer and never understood what was going on with my heart here. I want people to realise it took me a year and it's taken me £27,000 to get an answer for my heart. I want people to realise if you're going to your doctor and your doctor's telling you this is in your head, this is anxiety or whatnot, this vaccine is doing more harm than good. 1 year they have left me with myocarditis. I think it's time for people to start questioning. Start questioning the health professionals. It's time for you health professionals to realise you're doing more harm than good. I could have taken my own life because yous made me believe this was in my head. This narrative will change in the near future. Trust me when I say it. I want this message to get around the whole world and make yous realise it's time to start doing the right thing.
Yeah, so that's a powerful statement. I remember when I first heard it, it hit me. So is this a reflection of how a lot of people feel, Caroline?
Yeah, I think it is. Sorry, I've seen that several times, and every time it gets me. The bit that gets me is when he says, "You made me feel like it was in my head." And that's what a lot of people have found. I'm a little bit different. I've had a lot of support from healthcare professionals, and even if they haven't been able to do anything, they've been very kind and generally sympathetic on the whole. However, this has not been the case for most of our community. And there have been lots of cases where people have been told this is all in your head, it's anxiety, there's nothing wrong with you. And what they mean is, to be accurate, is they can't find anything wrong because the tests do not yet exist to show the things that are wrong with us. And we have had people like John who, after a year, some of us are coming up to 2 years now, but after a significant period of time of being told it's all in your head, there's nothing wrong with you, then the tests are being done that show that there are actually things, quite serious things, that are wrong with people. So John's frustration and upset is shared by a lot of people within our community.
Yeah, wow. It's important, I think, and I'm here to balance the discussion, okay? And so a lot of people would say, experts, scientists would say, listen, in any intervention, there is a risk. And it's a tiny fraction. We've given out millions of doses. And if the harm has come to a few people, why can't we just accept that? Why do we have to make any noise about it? Before I get Caroline to say something, I'd be interested to hear Christian's view, because you're not vaccine injured. And so can you understand that perspective?
I can understand that that's what people are saying, and a lot of people will use that as an argument all the time. But there's actually a lot more to unpick from that statement. And I think it's a very dismissive statement, because it then sort of starts to treat people as collateral damage and for the greater good, which I really struggle with that ideology, especially when people haven't been given all of the information that they were needed to make an informed choice. And that was sort of, to start with, a bit of my introduction into wanting to work with this group, was that because I had an interest in behavioural psychology, I was able to understand the behavioural science that was used. And I truly believe that the way that was used meant that people were not able to give proper informed consent to whether or not to take a vaccine. So that is one thing that I think was really important. The other aspect that was important to me is that if that's the case, that we've given billions of doses and a tiny percentage have been injured, and we looked after those injured people really well because they did the right thing, I could take that argument to some degree. The thing that I find very, very difficult is that they're ignored. The medical community don't often see them. It's changing. Last year was very, very difficult. But also the population don't really want to hear them. And the thing that is difficult in the UK, I think, was we were all told we're in this together. We've got this pandemic and got to get vaccinated. That was the message. But when people got injured, no one was there. The government weren't there to support them. The infrastructure of the NHS is not there to support them. We don't have protocols. We don't have nice guidelines. And so that argument that has been given, if there were nice guidelines, because we know there are injuries, and the trials would have shown that, and what we're seeing at the moment is we are seeing injuries and they're being acknowledged. We're seeing deaths. We're seeing reports on death certificates. Then there should be protocols drawn up to help people. And then that argument, I believe, would actually hold a little bit more weight. But at the moment, I don't think that is fair, because too many people have been injured and just left with no help at all.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is a big issue, and I'm trying to see if I can get a balance to why it is that it has been left for so long. And I think that because the narrative was so important for safe and effective, that you're messing up the message, if that makes any sense. It messes up the message. How does it make you feel, Caroline, with regards to this? And you are reflecting the group when you speak, so it may not necessarily be your own personal perspective, but what does that feel like?
It makes you feel like you don't matter at all. Like, no, whatever you're going through, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares about it. You literally left to rot. I think somebody just posted something like that, and that's what it feels like. It feels like it doesn't matter. You don't know what the future holds, because you don't know where is your place in the world as a vaccine injured person if everybody on all sides of the debate nobody wants to hear about it. And the people who do want to hear about it will just use your story for their own means. You don't seem to find, or it feels like it anyway, it doesn't feel like you're finding compassion anywhere that you look. Not from the medical professionals, not from, in many cases, from friends, and from society, from the media, and in some cases even from your family. It's a very, very lonely place to be.
And I can imagine that this has real time effects on people's ability to work, their finances, their family life. And there is just, in effect, without your kind of support, what would they have? Nothing.
We are a bit of a life, for some people we are a lifeline. Some people literally have nowhere else to go. All of those people that I just explained to you, the people close to them, they don't care. In some cases, they don't care. They don't have family support at all. There are people living at home in situations where they can't talk about it. They're told not to talk about it. If they do talk about it, then they're said that they're embarrassing people and they should stop talking about it. Not everybody has the kind of support that like Charlotte and I do, for example, where people encourage us to talk about it and they're proud of us. But a lot of people in our community they're not in that situation. And UKCV is literally a lifeline, which is why and as it is with a lot of online support groups, the international ones or the ones that are specific to other countries. And this is why it's so problematic when these support groups get shut down by Facebook, because they're literally taking away what can be for some people their only outlet, their only support, their only safe place.
So let me understand that. So Facebook was taking down the groups. What was the logic in that?
I don't want to speculate on what the logic might have been with that. I can just tell you what I know, what actually happened. So I know this because before UKCV, before Charlotte set up UKCV family, I think that's where Charlotte and I probably met, on one of the international groups, and I was an admin on another group, and we had thousands of members, and Facebook went on I don't know quite what happened, but one after the other, I think there were 3 different groups that were all shut down within the space of a week, and that was one of ours.
Wow. Any thoughts on that, Christian? Take it step outside of your experience. Can you see where they're coming from?
I think it's all to do with the narrative and what you were saying earlier, that the rollout is the most important thing. So anything that was going to detract from that, or in their words, create hesitancy, I think was being told, we've got to label it as misinformation. And so people talking about their lived experience stories was silenced and censored, because I truly believe that lived experience stories are the most powerful way of getting a message out. So I think that to me feels why those groups were shut down. Doesn't mean it's right in the slightest. I think it was one of the most dangerous things, and it certainly will have contributed to people becoming very, very emotionally unwell. Could well have contributed to some of the suicides we've seen. It has, as Caroline rightly said, it has been a lifeline for many, many people. And that is the message that I get over and over again when I have met people, is without this, I don't know if I would still be here today. So for those to be shut down was so dangerous. And again, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to continue working with the group, because I just could not believe what I was seeing back last year. It felt so unethical, so inhumane. So that would be what I think was happening, was there was a view that anyone talking about this could create, in inverted commas, hesitancy, so we need to shut it down. So again, it's that greater good mentality, which to me is always a very, very dangerous mentality to have.
Yeah, and so Caroline, I want to ask this sensitive question, because Christian just mentioned it. This issue with regards to the mental health, the suicide, what's the reality on the ground in the groups?
In UKCV, we've lost 1 member to suicide. In the international groups, we've lost a number of people to suicide. Those are just the people who found a way to do that. But the topic of suicide is a frequent topic of discussion. It's something that regularly comes. I would be surprised. The vast majority of our groups, I would say, have at some point or another thought about suicide. And it's not from the point of view of wanting to die, and it's the point of view of finding it impossible to live. And they're 2 very different things. So the quality of life is removed when you become this ill, or when it's so much of an effort to have any quality of life. It's just too difficult, and there's no help. And I think if you were really ill, and if even if the government said, you know what, this was new, we didn't know what was going to happen, we didn't know, we knew something was going to happen, but we haven't been able to get ourselves together to provide support for you, but every single one of you will get mental health support. while we try to figure out what's going on. If that alone happened, that would go a long way, I think, to helping people with their mental health. And I think it would go a long way into preventing, or at least maybe finding ways to dealing with suicidal thoughts. But it's a very real problem, and we will lose more.
Wow. And so that is a huge issue in front of us, because the problems don't go away. Now, and one of the interesting things that I'm trying to get a balance on, because I do quite a bit of research with long COVID. Now, I have found that long COVID focus tends to be a lot on the protection from the vaccine, and they can get quite upset, even though, strangely, the pattern of symptoms could be quite similar. It seems as though it's almost a counter to what is happening with the vaccine injured. Have you noticed that?
I didn't really understand the questions. I'm really sorry.
So, do you get the same kind of support when you come across any long COVID groups? Is that a supportive group, or a group that challenges the fact that you are, in effect, challenging the thing that they believe is a protection for them? Because a lot of the narrative was that vaccines protect against long COVID. So all of these things play into it. And this is why I asked that question. I don't know if you've come across that at all, or any thoughts on that.
I can take this. I think that it's very difficult to lump in all people who have long COVID with the same kind of opinions. I know that there are some people who have long COVID who do exactly what you've just said, but then there are other people who have long COVID and in long COVID groups are incredibly sympathetic and supportive. So I think it's quite a difficult one to generalize there. And I think it's best to generally try to encourage the support between those two different groups. A lot of us are suffering from the similar conditions, and people with long COVID in their early days, they were also treated quite unkindly by people who didn't believe the things that they were dealing with. So I think it's generally best to try to move forward, trying to share information and to be as supportive of each other as possible.
Yeah. And Christian, when you think about the group that you're speaking to, I'm interested to hear, when you come across the people who minimize the vaccine injured or even long COVID, what can you say to them?
Well, before I say what I would like to say to them, I think there's part of trying to understand why, and it's something we haven't really discussed, is what I noticed last year was everyone was attacking the vaccine injured. Whether you were someone who was very pro-vaccine, they wanted the vaccine injured to shut up. They were spreading misinformation. They are lying. They're trying to get money. They want this £120,000 compensation or whatever. So there was that group wanting them to be quiet. Then you had the people who are very against the vaccine and standing up against COVID measures, saying, well, it's your own fault. You know, you're a sheep, all those things. So they were being very attacked from different directions. And I think that was a really, really hard place to be, because it felt that no one was really giving anyone support. And that's one of the reasons why, as I said, I kind of joined in. But I was trying to understand why both sides were attacking them, what was going on for them. And it was because, I think, as you rightly said a minute ago, people have put the vaccine rollout on a big pedestal. It's there to protect us. So I don't want that knocked, because if we start to knock that, I feel a bit unsafe. The vaccine was there to keep me safe, and I like that narrative. But if we start to say there's problems with it, I struggle. So people who are very pro the rollout didn't want that to happen. And then people who are against the measures were also just thinking, well, you know, we wouldn't be in this mess if everyone hadn't taken part. The bit that's missing, and against the bit that I mentioned at the start, is actually the unethical psychological tools that were used to confuse everybody and divide the public. And that's exactly what's happened. We've become so divided. So when you're talking about how do the long COVID people see the vaccine injured, again, Caroline rightly said at the start, they were treated very badly. But now, again, that number has grown, so that has come down. and I'm hoping that's going to happen, unfortunately, with the vaccine injured, because the acknowledgement is starting to be there. We are starting to get through. What I want to say to everyone on all sides are, we need to have more compassion and care, because we're all trying to do the right thing and get through it. And for some reason, we have been so split as a society. And that is one of my major concerns about what has happened since 2020, is the splits. And that we're always looking at someone to blame, because it's a lot easier to have an enemy rather than actually look at other things that are going on. Why did someone use unethical psychology on me? It's a lot easier to blame someone. So when we're saying what do we want to say to people, it is more, be compassionate. Think about what that might be like if you walk in their shoes for a little while, because we're all human and we're all trying to muddle through this thing called life. But I don't know, but I don't know why, but I just really feel that 2020, probably start of 2021, the compassion just really, really went away. And I found that very, very difficult.
Yeah, this is a fascinating area to look at, and the impact that it has on people at different stages. Now, I was just reflecting as you were talking, Christian, is that there are a number of cohorts in the context of the vaccine injured, in that some people were, as people would argue, going with the narrative, trying to do the best to support what was happening, and they took the vaccine, they had a complication. But Caroline, I'm sure that there are some people who felt forced to take it for the purpose of work or travel or whatever else, and got vaccine injured. Is it a different coping mechanism that they need to have?
Oh, that's a really interesting topic. I think the people I let him think about this for a minute. I think that I'm speaking for a lot of people here. So I think the people who felt pressured, but had some set deep down, they felt it wasn't the right thing to do, and they did it anyway. I think for that group of people, there's an extra level of difficulty, because there's an awful lot of blame of yourself there. I think we all blame ourselves. I think we're all kicking ourselves a lot. But the group of people who knew, or in hindsight felt there was something, I mean, if you want to be a little bit spiritual about it, felt there were signs from the universe saying to them, you shouldn't do this, I shouldn't be doing this, but they ignored that instinct. I think for that group of people it is very, very difficult, because they blame themselves. And perhaps another group who absolutely had no idea and were going into it to do what they believed was they absolutely believed was the right thing. I think for them there's a even bigger shock element, that how could this happen? But then for all of us, I think there's the shock element of, why does nobody care? And I think we all go into medication or appointments with our doctors or whatever, everything that we do to do with our health, we somehow think if something goes wrong, somebody's going to be there to help me, and people will generally feel a bit sorry for me if something goes wrong. And to find out that really isn't the case at all, and that there isn't anybody there to help you, and that not a lot of people are going to feel sorry for you at all, that is a big shock that we all have.
Wow. One of the problems from a clinical point of view is that we have to deal with what we call functional disease. And functional disease is where a patient perceives they have an issue, they have real symptoms, we can't find an organic cause, and we therefore put it as more psychosomatic, mind over matter. How does the vaccine injured community get over this hurdle? Now, I've seen the same argument for long COVID, but I think for the vaccine injured, it could be even more difficult. Any thoughts on that, Christian?
Well, I think that a lot of people have been already put off mental health support through trying to get help, physical help, for the vaccine injury, because a lot of people were given the diagnosis of FND. You just need to go and see a psychologist and have some breathing exercises, maybe a bit of mindfulness, or they've been told it's anxiety. You know, you need to take your mind off things, go for a walk. And, you know, it's really minimized the physical parts. And I deal with, you know, psychosomatic aspects regularly in my day job. That's commonplace. But the one thing that we never do when someone is sent to me and it may well be psychosomatic is not believe them. The pain is real that someone is experiencing. I do not say, well, it's not really there. It's not there. It's real. It's real to them. I might not understand where it's coming from, and we may well work psychologically. We might try to get symptomatic relief, or we might try and look more psychoanalytically at where this pain is coming from. But the pain is real. And the thing that I'm noticing a lot is a lot of times people, and again, I'm speaking more so last year, were told it isn't there. The pain is not there. And that to me was very dehumanizing and, you know, makes that a lot worse. And if you think about the fact of medical trauma, we all know that if someone experiences a medical injury, there is going to be some form of psychological stress or trauma associated with it. And all the evidence shows that if someone has a traumatic experience, if they're allowed to explore that experience and their trauma in a safe and compassionate way, we really minimize the risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder greatly if we encourage them to talk about it and care about what they're saying. But if we don't want someone to talk about it, if we shut them up, if we say it didn't really happen, it wasn't really that bad, then we greatly elevate the chances of developing post-traumatic stress disorder. So a lot of people have had a medical injury, they've had trauma as a result of that medical injury, and then by not even sort of, if it's been told it's psychological, not caring that much about it, by giving them the right support to talk about that, we're actually elevating the risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder. So we're adding extra injury to their existing injury. And, you know, you will know, and many people here will know that PTSD is an extremely debilitating mental health condition, and that greatly elevates the risk of suicide. So it's very, very difficult, I think it is difficult for doctors, because if they can't come up with an answer, we often think it's psychological. What I'm noticing, though, is if I say I don't think it is psychological, I'm often not really listened to. And that is very difficult as well, because then, people are saying, well, where do we go from there? If the medical side are saying it's psychological, and the psychological part is saying it's medical, what do we do? And I think that's a very, very difficult place. And that's why it really needs more conversation between the medics and the psychiatrists and the psychologists and the psychotherapists. We need to be having more of a multidisciplinary team approach to this, because absolutely some things will be psychological in nature. Of course they will. That's without a shadow of a doubt. But not everything is. And I think, as Caroline rightly said, the tests aren't there. The tests when you go and see a GP, for the doctor to go, aha, this is what it is. It's a vaccine injury, and this is what's happened. And I think this is where I feel the censorship of the vaccine injured has really, really been dangerous, because we're not allowing people to talk about their experiences of injury, and not allowing doctors to talk about what they're seeing, because they were all deplatformed or told they're lying or spreading misinformation. Other doctors are not able to then learn from it, because, you know, when we were talking earlier about certain people being diagnosed with anxiety, when actually it's a cardiac issue they've got, it's often because those people presenting are maybe a couple of years ago fitted into a profile that said it probably is anxiety. That has really changed in the last couple of years. So someone, say, I don't know, a 25-year-old girl going to the GP saying, I've had chest pains. The GP may well say, well, that sounds like a panic attack. That I don't think they can risk just saying that anymore. They have to do investigations. They really, really have to. And it feels really important to me that people are taken seriously when they're talking about the physical symptoms now.
Yeah, no, that's a very important point. And I just wanted to ask Caroline here a thought. So, Caroline, imagine that there are a lot of people here who may be vaccine injured, who have never done anything and are battling with their struggles on their own. Just imagine that you are starting from scratch with what you know now. What should those people do?
Start a GoFundMe account. Probably. No, honestly, I mean, if you want any proper investigations done at all, then you're going to need money. It's very expensive. Many of us have spent thousands and thousands. I think I'm probably on about 15,000 by now.
Wow.
So your financial situation is going to play a big part in how much how many investigations you're going to be able to have. It's very difficult. I wouldn't, I'm not, everybody's a bit different. So I don't think I'm very comfortable giving people specific advice. I wrote a book that's a survival guide for vaccine injured. And that, I hope, accommodates all the different ways that people might choose to move forward. But my kind of underlying thing I've often written about and spoken about is that you can't rely on the medical professionals to have answers for this at all. You're going to have to take things into your own hands if you feel able to explore as many natural options as you can. Whether you think you've got a mental health problem or not, you probably will do by the time you've dealt with a vaccine injury for any length of time. So try to pay attention to your mental health right from the beginning. Find a support group really quickly. And no, you're not alone. You're really not alone. Nothing's going to happen quickly. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. The answers aren't going to be there. You're going to have to dig really, really deep into finding strength you didn't know that you had. And but hang in there, because you will make friends with and meet people. I feel a bit emotional saying this part. You'll meet people who will give you the incredible amount of guidance and love and friendship along the way. There are people out there that you wouldn't imagine. The level of kindness is out there.
Wow, that is very, very touching, Caroline, and great idea. I mean, what's the name of that book that you mentioned? The Survival Guide?
I meant to, when I did my introduction, I meant to mention it. I wrote this book. It's not a very big book, COVID Vaccine Adverse Reaction Survival Guide, and it was everything that I learned in the first year and how I kind of organized my healing. I took my healing into my own hands straight away. From day one, I knew that the doctors wouldn't have any answers for this, and I knew that there was a lot of things that I could do in terms of food and lifestyle that could could maximize my body's chance of healing on its own. It's not going to fix anything. I don't claim that anything's going to fix it, but there are things that we can do. Really, I would want to say to somebody in the early stages, actually, that you don't have to do this alone. Thinking about it now, I've had a bit more time to think about it. The biggest message is you don't have to do this alone. Please don't do it alone. Reach out. There are people who will help you.
Yeah. And so, Christian, the question I wanted to ask Christian was about pulling back with regards to how do people handle family relationships? Because that must be one heck of a nightmare to cope with if the vaccine injured are not even accepted within the family and those around them. What kind of psychological tools can they use to cope with that?
I think, that, and this has opened up a bigger part of the puzzle. I think it isn't just the injury, the physical injury someone has. The psychological implications are huge. They're absolutely huge, because your life was like this one moment and now it's like that. So you marry someone or you live with someone and then you change because you can't do the same things anymore. You can't Lots of people cannot go out for a dog walk. It's as simple as things like that may well have been a huge part of your relationship with your partner, and they can't do that anymore. So it ripples out throughout families. And that was one of the very first things I noticed when I was talking to people, was that many relationships have broken down that wouldn't have broken down if the person wasn't injured. And that I found very, very upsetting to listen to, because it just felt a shame. I was just like, I'm absolutely gutted for you, because you had someone that was really, really important in your life and you've lost that. So the sense of loss that comes with vaccine injury is huge. People have lost so much of their identity because they can't do the same things. They can't work, they can't do that. And for a lot of people, and I know I'm being stereotypical here, but maybe the man who's the breadwinner all of a sudden can't go out and do that anymore. That is huge, and that can really hurt their ego as well. So there is a lot of difficulties that ripple out inside the family. And then it gets even worse if people don't really believe them. If the medical profession don't believe you, then maybe a partner's not going to believe you either. And that is awful. That's such a bad place. So when you're saying what can people do, what are the tools, it's very, very complicated, because everyone is so different, and the family system is all going to be very different. But I would be saying talk more and more and more. And the other thing that people I've noticed can happen as well is a lot of people only get support from the support group, from places like UKCV Family. And so they really hone in on that. Rightly so, I would as well. I think that is one of the most protective things they can do. But then family members might feel, you're not spending as much time with me. And so that can also cause division in a relationship. So it's really, really complicated. So on one hand, I would say to people, spend as much time with your support group, because they're going to get you through this. But you also might jeopardize something there as well. So it is very, very hard. But I am a firm believer, and it's probably because of what I do for my job, I just believe in talk more and more and more. And because when you're really open and honest in a relationship about what's going on for you, the other person can get you a little bit better. When people are holding back, it can be really difficult. And again, I'm being gender sort of specific here, but guys often don't talk about their feelings. And so they will bottle up what it is. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. They don't want to talk about it. And that can cause ripples as well. So I do think it's so important, if people are in relationships and someone's been injured, spend more time together just discussing how you feel. Very difficult for some people to do, and that's not just men, that's women as well. But it is very difficult sometimes to talk about how you feel.
Can I add another element? I know you've got a question.
Go ahead.
Can I just add one different element to that? So this is in the case where you have a supportive partner, or you have supportive family members, and you may well have gone from you were a very independent, very active participant in the relationship in all senses of the word, and then overnight you suddenly become an inactive. You can't participate in the relationship and in the life that you had before, but your partner is incredibly supportive of that and steps up. Now that in itself can cause an incredibly challenging situation, because you're not used to being the person who's dependent on someone else. You may well have spent an entire lifetime being a very independent person, and suddenly you are then dependent on your partner, and that's really difficult, and that can cause tension. You wouldn't think it could, but it could. And I know there are people for whom that has happened. And what helps in those situations, I think, is if you see your relationships evolve over time. And if we just carry on in a relationship where we're just playing those same roles all the time, we miss out on the opportunity to learn new things about each other. We miss out, perhaps, as an independent person, we don't give our partner the opportunity to step up, and that can be very good for them. That can be very good for your relationship. You can learn things from that whole experience. But it can be the whole thing is challenging, whether your partner is supportive or not. It's going to be challenging on your relationship.
And so, as we come to this big question, I mean, we're raising awareness about this issue, but fundamentally, what is the structure that is needed, and how is this different from some of the other conditions like the ME/CFS, the fibromyalgia, people who have struggled for long periods? I know it's not specifically a direct injury, but there are these groups that have struggled to find the right support. If you got access to government to say, okay, let's give you what you need, what is that?
I think the ME/CFS communities have have faced this very similar challenges that we now find ourselves facing, and that includes with the lack of sympathy and lack of understanding. However, in the area in which I think that we differ is the hatred element. That's the part that I would like to see changing. I would like to see our culture completely change its attitude towards the unkindness and real hatred towards the vaccine injured. It should not be something that people are afraid to talk about. There are still people who have been injured for a year and they haven't told anybody that they work with, if they are still able to work. There are some people who haven't even told their family members and they're suffering alone. We should not have that.
That is huge. How do people cope with that, Christian?
Well, I think that people self-censor a lot. That's what I'm seeing all the time. It's not just the censorship that they're facing through social media and stuff. They are doing that because they don't want the response, which is usually something like, well, I've had 3 jabs and I'm fine. That's the normal response that someone gets when they say, I think I was injured by the vaccine. It's very rarely met with, oh, I'm really sorry, are you okay? Or tell me something I can do to help. It's normally met with this, and that's a psychological defense in itself, but it becomes across extremely uncaring. We would never say this, and I know Caroline has said this at a few talks that I've listened to before. You'd never say that about someone else. If someone said, I've just had a miscarriage, you'd never go, well, I've got 2 healthy babies. You would never say that.
That's an excellent point. Yes,
I've stolen that from Caroline.
That kind of that hatred, that negativity, and that way that people treat vaccine injured, that's not just a government thing. The media has a huge responsibility for the way that everybody talks to vaccine injured, and all of us have to all of us can change that culture ourselves by how we speak to anybody who's vaccine injured.
Absolutely, and I think that you said something really important there, Caroline. It's not just the government, but it was promoted. That the use of shame was a psychological tool that I found extremely unethical. We got into, it was encouraged to shame people into changing their behaviour, whether it was mask wearing or social distancing or not taking a vaccine or whatever. There was an encouragement of using shame, and that was really, really unethical. But we can't rely on the government, unfortunately, to change that. We can change that ourselves, and people need to start to change that themselves and think before you speak. And that, to me, is a really important point. When someone is saying they're injured, the standard response, which is a psychological defense, because I still think people just don't want to believe that this is a bigger deal as it is. That is something that is huge. They can't cope with. A lot of people just do not want to believe that this problem is as big as it really is, because it makes them feel worried, unsafe. All these things happen, so they get in there really quick. But I'm okay. And all that does is protect them, but it hurts the person who's just opened up and shared something so important. This life-changing event has happened to me, and all you can say is something about you. It's really difficult. So, what I'm hoping with time, and I want it soon, is that this is more open, that it is okay for people to talk about this. This is what happened to me, this story, and this is how I feel, and people to feel just empathy and care. And you're right, there is such a crossover or simile with CFS and fibromyalgia, but that level of denial, the denial is sometimes there. I'll give it that. But you're right, it's the anger. when I don't want you to talk about it. We don't say to someone, I don't want you to talk about chronic fatigue syndrome, but we often tell people, I don't want you to talk about vaccine injury.
Yeah, one of the interesting things from my research is that I anticipate that this is going to become a bigger problem. As you said, this is going to balloon in the sense that I suspect that there is a significant amount of the population that may have vaccine injuries and they're not even aware that they have vaccine injuries. How do they cope with that when people are just not feeling well? They're not sure what's going on. Many people never consider that this could be a part of the picture. You know, what happens if people really start to look? Because the numbers could be much bigger than we anticipate.
I think that that's one of the reasons why, on an unconscious level, people can be quite horrible. I think that some people don't want to believe that there might be something inside them that could be causing them a problem. So I think, again, it's some defense. But I think the big problem here is, what is the percentage of people suffering at the moment is related to a vaccine? I think that is an unknown. I don't know. And that's the bit that is very worrying, because, and maybe that's another reason why the censorship is there, because actually, could society cope if they started to see how many people actually were injured? And then, actually, is my injury not just fate, just happened to me, but actually because I chose to take a vaccine? Goes back to what Caroline said, was there was a lot of anger sometimes or blame directed internally. That's a very, very difficult thing. It's a lot easier just to say, I just developed a heart condition, or this just happened to me. But when someone says, I did this to myself, it's actually very, very difficult to cope with.
I've been asked before at a speech, and I think one that Christian and I go together, and somebody said, how do I convince my friends who think they've got long COVID? How do I convince them that actually it's a vaccine injury? And I said, well, you don't. Let them think they've got long COVID. And if people are sick, it shouldn't actually matter what's made them ill. But if somebody's got long COVID, they'll have access to clinics that a vaccine injured person won't be allowed access to. They'll be treated with far more sympathy than any vaccine injured person will be spoken to, and will be treated with, and they won't have to deal with an added psychological element of coming to terms with the fact that you're vaccine injured and everything that comes with that.
Yeah, I'm just looking at, we have so many comments. I mean, some good, some bad. I think it's useful to reflect on all of them. This person says, Amanda, I think my friend was vaccine injured, but she won't say to the doctors, no matter how many problems she's had since the shot. I mean, that's difficult to cope with, you know, and there is still a degree of embarrassment, because it appears kind of like what we had with depression. It's because you are weak why this happened. And these are all the stigmas that are in people's minds that somehow we have to be able to overcome. We are on the cusp of a very important stage in the pandemic. And I think that the voices that you guys have done by sharing this and by doing this is absolutely incredible, you know. And what is it, if you are talking to the audience now, and I'll ask you, Caroline, first, as we're coming towards the end, what do you want to say to the audience, and what do you need from them?
Oh, I always say compassion and kindness. You know, if you're pro-vaccine, if you're against the COVID vaccine or injection or whatever you want to call it, or against vaccines in general, it doesn't mean that you don't have to be kind and compassionate. There is no excuse for not being kind or compassionate to anybody who's ill, whether it's caused by a vaccine or not. That's always my message, is just be kind. Make this, and when you're being, the way that you can do that in kind of more practical terms is make yourself a safe space for anybody who's vaccine injured to be able to talk to as well. And you don't make yourself a safe space by being very very, very openly pro or very, very openly anti and being angry about anything, you're not going to be a safe space for somebody who might be vaccine injured and suffering alone.
Excellent. And Christian, what would you say at this point? What do you think objectively is needed at this time?
There needs more acknowledgement, and we're getting there. But if we get more acknowledgement, we get more understanding from the medical community. They'll be able to ask more probing questions. The questions that I don't really ever get heard are, did you have a COVID vaccine, and when was your last vaccine? They're really important questions to be asking, because without that, we're missing a huge part of the puzzle. So I think if we have more acknowledgement, the medical community will start to ask those questions. They can get we can get early intervention, because we all know for virtually anything, early intervention is key to the quickest and safest recovery. So if we can start to ask those questions. But I also think we need, from the top down, and this is where I think that a lot of the anger, rightly so, is why are our MPs, and some are being extremely supportive, and I think sometimes we give it a hard time to say no one is listening. There are a lot of supportive MPs out there, but we need these questions being asked more. What support is out there? What can be done? We have a patient, I think, safety commissioner. We need that person really looking into it. We need nice guidelines drawn up. We need protocols drawn up to what to look for, because then we can start to get the care. So that's on the medical front. On the psychological front, I think Caroline has just summed it up. It's compassion and suspending beliefs. It's a little bit irrelevant sometimes what your views are on COVID or the vaccination or vaccines in general. When you're dealing with someone saying, this is my story, suspend your belief in that moment and just be with that person. It goes back to kind of my kind of training is I have to bracket out my stuff a lot of the time when I'm listening to people. And it's really important just to be with that person and let them say what they want to say without saying yes, but, and getting in there. So it is about compassion and raising awareness. To me, those are the most important things. And what you're saying to the audience, it's if you meet someone who's vaccine injured, just listen and be kind. That to me has always been something that I think me and Caroline and I have always kind of been on the same page from the start. That's what's missing, is the compassion.
Excellent. Wow. Thank you very much, guys, for this tremendous conversation. I mean, I think that there is so much engagement, and it's appreciated. A lot of people, I think, will benefit from this. And I think that this is a conversation that has to continue. Please, and as just a final thing, Caroline, in terms of the UK CV family, they can find that online. And
ukcvfamily.org.
ukcvfamily.org. I wish I had the point up for people to see, but we don't. Thank you again, guys. Appreciate it very much. I'll ask you to hang with me as I do the outro. And to the audience, thank you for being with us. This has been a very important conversation. The narrative is changing for many people. Let's pray that it goes in the right direction. Have a great evening to everyone until we meet again.